We are in our study of Proverbs, and we're coming down to the last couple of classes. We have really kind of been down into some of the specifics. We're going to kind of pan back, and the last two are going to be even broader in the topical sense. Next week, we're going to look at the blessings of righteous living from the book of Proverbs, and if there's time at the end of class, I think it'd be good for us to look at Proverbs in the New Testament and see how often there are correlations between those two and how it connects to our New Testament. Today, I thought we would begin in a direction that's obviously impactful for how we live our lives every day, and to talk about what Proverbs has to say about God. Now, obviously, all the Bible is talking about God. When we think about how books can be structured and formatted, there are some particular books in the Bible that we could say are theological. Now, when we say a book is theological, what are we trying to convey about it? What's theological? Theology. You hear those words thrown around the church?
Formative to the belief system.
Okay, belief about what specifically? Okay, God said theology is God, is the study of God, right? So there are certain books that really kind of are central or center around helping us to know about God. Can you think of some books that are pretty foundational to a study of God?
Job.
Okay, Job, very theological, even though much of the book is about what's going on, how's God interacting in this. Job and the friends are trying to figure out what is God doing this, not understanding the nature of the warfare that's going on. But we get a very big picture of God, especially at the end of the book. How about in the beginning, God? And you go through the book of Genesis, and it tells us gives us our first pictures of God. It tells us who God is and what His character is. You look at various statements that are made by characters in the book of Genesis. Like Hagar, this is the God who sees. This tells us something about Him. Or you have Abraham, as Abraham is tested by God to give up his son, and the Holy Spirit stays His hand, and a ram is provided. At the end of this, in Genesis 22:14, Abraham says He is Jehovah Jireh. He is the God who provides. And so Genesis is giving us kind of a foundational framework for who God is. How about some New Testament books? Hebrews, very much theological. And specifically, it gives us perhaps our most comprehensive picture of God the Son. Right? Can you think of any others?
Would John be one?
John is very much a theological book. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God, not? Okay, so let them know that. Okay, all right.
Welcome back, folks.
Yeah, hey, long time no see. All right. You have your health app open there. You got a few extra steps for that. And the book of John is very much devoted to theological statements about God. Romans would be another. So when you think about Proverbs, do you think of it as being a theological book? When you think about Proverbs, what do you think it's about? What's its general theme? What do we emphasize? Wisdom. Really, that's what it centers around, right? So you look at especially the heart of the book of Proverbs, and you have what is almost like driving on a windy road. If all is well, we drive from here to home on Cemetery, and yes, Cemetery Road going east toward Allen County is a bit windy, but if you ever have to be on Alberton, Green Hill or Old Green Hill Road, or some of the pig trails up there in the north part of the county, you know there's some windy roads. Or if you really want to complete the picture, go to West Virginia, get on Highway 250 and stay on it for the entire state. That is where you see your taillights as you're driving through your front windshield. It's so windy. And people can look at Proverbs like that. We're going from here to there, and it seems to us to be disjointed. It's this piece of wisdom and that piece of wisdom, and you go from one to the other. But is there a great sense in which, if a book is about wisdom, that it's theological? I think that it is. and it's devoted to, a book about wisdom is going to have to be a book that's theological in its nature. And the center of the book, in many ways, is the fear of the Lord. So there's some very pivotal statements in Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Or Proverbs chapter 9 and verse 10, it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. And so there are a few of these fear statements where we have that having a fear of the Lord, so that's theological centered, is the way we're going to know anything that's worth knowing. It's the way that we're going to have the only kind of wisdom that's approved by God. Now, when we think about fear, the fear of the Lord, he's not talking about a terror of God that would cause us to cower in his presence. And there's such a misunderstanding of what the fear of God is that some have that conclusion. So we're talking about having a proper view of God. Any theological truth is going to help us to see him as he is and not as the world would say that he is, or how we in our warped way of thinking or our experience may come to think about how he is. And the struggles we have in our lives morally, the struggles we have in our lives relationally, the struggles we have with sin in our lives in some way is because we have a distorted view of our relationship with God. You know, it would not make sense for this fear of the Lord to be this terror that makes us cower in his presence, or you wouldn't have all of these statements throughout the book of Proverbs and other books that say that he wants you to come near into his presence. Have you ever been in some kind of relationship? I don't even necessarily mean in your family, where you it was a relationship built on intimidation, or you felt like every time you were around them, you know, you didn't know if they were going to be so hot-tempered that you had to be in that relationship, you could not help but be in it, and you never knew who you were going to get, and they could be scary. At the worst, maybe it was worse in childhood. You could think of some of that. Maybe there was a bully. And some people can come to have that view of God. You know, think about James saying, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. And so the God that we are to fear, to have awe and respect for, is a God who we want to be in relationship with. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 26 and 27, I think, gives us this picture of how God wants us to trust him and not be terrified of him. In the fear of the Lord, he says, Proverbs 14, 26 and 27, in the fear of the Lord, one has strong confidence, and his children will have a refuge. The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, that one may turn away from the snares of death. And so, one little picture of how Solomon and the other Proverbs writers are trying to paint for us an accurate picture of God. And it's out of the foundation of that we are going to be able to navigate the various aspects of our life better. So a major point of Solomon's writing is that a right view of God leads to a right way of living. So the question is, what are some wrong views that people have about God? And this can include believers, those who are atheistic, believers in the body of Christ, believers religiously in a broader sense. What are some of the wrong views people have of God?
That he tempts or creates sin.
That he what? That he tempts. Or creates sin. Okay. What else? Oh, by the way, James 1:13-15 gives us a better, clearer perspective of what's going on there. We let ourselves off the hook. We may overly credit the devil, but certainly he deserves credit for his approaches. 1 John 2:16. What else? Wrong views of God.
The notion that he won't punish, like he's only loving and he forgives, so he's not going to punish you.
Okay, so that he's just kind of up there smiling. Oh, I can't believe that they did that, and that's so. Now, I know some of you are in that stage of life. Been there. Sometimes a parental response, even a grandparent response, is the child is just all over the place, and oh, what a cute little, and you're going, well, there is another way to look at that, right? So some people say that's God, right? Here we are right on earth, all over the place, doing rebellion to His will, and God's like, oh, isn't that cute? Okay? I think so. What else?
He'll accept everyone when they die.
Okay. All-inclusive, embracing unconditionally. All right, and what's good in all of this is, and certainly as we have the Bible correct our view, is that does God love everybody to the depths of His being? Right? Ephesians 3:17-21, absolutely He does. He wants us to be saved and to come to a knowledge of the truth. 1 Timothy 2 and verse 4. To love unconditionally is not the same as to save unconditionally. But some people's view of God is ultimately, maybe some people will have a longer road to get there, but everybody is going to wind up okay. Because who could you look at in your life and say, I mean, you know, and that's certainly we say we're not the judge, but I'm saying in a general sense, a caricature in your mind, who is a person who could be lost? And we're not living in a world that would lend credence to that kind of thinking about principles, about behavior in life.
I was going to say that He's not really involved, like it's all up to us. We just kind of draw them. If there is a God, He's just, disengaged.
Right? That's the old idea that God wound the clock on the universe and then He stepped away. And so it's all going on down there and He's far away. And I want you to think about this. We're not done with our list yet. But these views that people have of God, can bits and pieces of them infect our thinking? May I suggest that bits and pieces of this infect all of our thinking? That's why we need books like Proverbs to reorient our picture, our view of God. And it's one of the great values of the book of Proverbs. All right, I don't think we have the totality of what explains people's view of God in our world today with what we've got so far. What would you add to the list? Yes, ma'am.
Also, some people are like, when something goes wrong, why did God let this happen, or why would He let this, if something negative happens in their life, they reflect that towards God and God.
Or He doesn't cause it, or he fails to prevent. So let's go back to Luke's comment a moment ago. That's the value, the theological value of the book of Job, is it clarifies. We sometimes give God the credit for the things that the devil is involved in, or the fact that we live in a fallen world. And so I can say, and how often, I think this is one that probably strikes us as much as anything. We know better. And yet, in the throes of suffering and afflictions and trials, our first inclination sometimes is to say, why is God letting this happen? Or why is God doing this to me? Right? And there are various other explanations that we may be missing. What else?
God of old versus God of new, implying that somehow He magically changed at some point.
Okay. Okay, and this is not, there's a partial view of God. And so you're highlighting the Old Testament. And we've mentioned this before. The Old Testament God picture is what? Wrath. Noah and the ark, right? The 10 plagues. The call for the destruction of the Israelites. So a God who is punitive, a God who is a God of judgment, a God of wrath. And then, by contrast, the God of the New Testament, which we would classify as what?
Loving.
Forgiveness, love.
Compassionate, gracious, merciful. And I always like to say the statement that both of those are partially right. They're half right. But both of those explanations miss the fact that God is not a God of change. He does not change. He is the same God. And so the God we see in the Old Testament is a God of, and we can always point that out. You can see the grace, you can see the mercy, you can point those things out. And in the New Testament, you can see His justice, you can see His wrath. And so you put that together, and it does depict people's view of God. All right? What else? Anything else? And there's another one that's kind of like this one. The view of God in my life. And it probably kind of hits the antithesis of this one. What would be the kind of the contrast or the opposite of a God who's just an indulgent grandfatherly figure?
That he's just waiting for you to mess up so he can punish you.
He's got a trigger finger. He's just he's angry and ready to punish. And again, there are truths that make this at one end of this, like Psalm 50 verse 21, when Asaph says that he talks about how you sit and you speak evil against your mother's son and you slander your brother. He said, these things you've done, I've kept silent. Therefore you thought that I was such a one or altogether such as you are. He says, but I will reprove you. I will set these things in order in my eyes. And so God, Ecclesiastes chapter 7 says because, or is it 8:7, says that because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily. I think it's 7:11, whatever. It's just read Ecclesiastes at the back end. He said, because a sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the hearts of the sons of men is set on doing evil continually. Okay, so in reaction to that, people have this picture that God cannot be pleased. He's upset, he's angry, and the first time that you slip and you mess up, he is going to make you pay. Maybe as to some response. When you have some affliction or trial in your life, it can distort your view and think that that's what God's just sitting there waiting for you to do. Now, here's the question about all of these. What's going to happen if we carry these or a combination of these into our spiritual lives day by day? Are we going to have a healthy view of God? We can't. And I would suggest to you, and I don't know that I have ever looked at Proverbs, by the way, if you want to kind of let me get you to there. All right. This is kind of a summary of the views that you have there. I think that's a better list, by the way. If we don't have a proper view of God, it's going to affect our daily lives. And Proverbs helps us. I had not approached the book of Proverbs without looking at how a lot of what Solomon says in the book points us to God. And if you want to talk about words that appear frequently, we talked about the mouth and the tongue, and we talked about self-control and all these different qualities that you're going to find in repeated words, wisdom and folly. The name of God is found about 100 times in the book of Proverbs. And all but 12 of those are in reference to Jehovah, the personal name of God. And so, as we'll see in just a moment, God wants us to know Him personally through the book of Proverbs. Now, there are two types of atheism in the world today. And one is philosophical atheism. Atheism, the belief that there is no God. What do you think that philosophical atheism is?
Agnostic.
So it's more your classical. It's more what you would think, right? It's the feeling that there is evidence that says that God does not exist. So that would describe, those of you in college, some of your professors, that would describe some that would be held up in society as experts in various fields, particularly philosophy and in science. The general worldview that might be existent in popular media, philosophical atheism. And a lot of folks have not examined the evidence that God exists and the evidence for that. And so that's where an evidence class would be extremely helpful. Philosophical atheism is what you're more familiar with. But in addition to that, there's what we might call practical atheism. What do you think practical atheism would be? The more dominant of the two, by the way, the more prevalent of the two. Philosophical atheism, that classical, what you would think of, what do you think practical atheism is?
Living like God doesn't exist.
It's exactly what it is. Now, that's more pernicious, that's more dangerous, because one might even live in a framework in which they say, I believe that God lives. But when it comes to the things that He wants me to do, He commands me to do, I live as though He doesn't exist. When it comes to the promises, what He has told me He has done for me, that He wants to do for me, and I don't embrace those, and I don't live as though those things are a central part of my life, then I'm living as though He doesn't exist. Yes, the book of Proverbs can help us with philosophical atheism, and a great many other books do as well. But it seems like Solomon is a much greater guide even in the realm of the practical atheism that you and I fight. And even though we would never say that God doesn't exist. And so look at the book of Proverbs as Solomon fighting for the faith of his son. And he does that throughout the book to help him to believe that God exists and that to help his son to understand just what kind of God that He is, that He wants his son to believe in and to rest his trust in. He is going to teach you throughout the book that life only works when you have a proper relationship with God, when you trust in Him rather than trusting in yourselves. There are a lot of different ways to skin the cat in the book of Proverbs, but this is a fundamental one that I want us to look at today. All right, so in the time that we have, I want us to just look at 5 truths about God that Solomon is going to highlight throughout the book of Proverbs. First thing is that God is personal. So what do we mean by a statement like that? God, you've heard that, right? We serve a personal God. What does that indicate?
It's possible to have a relationship.
Okay, it implies very much relationship, because when you think about persons, you're thinking about an interaction. You think about a principle laid down in the very first chapter of the Bible with regard to human creation. It's not good for man to be alone. We were meant to interact. Even if you don't get married, you don't function well in isolation. I think it's interesting to see the personal God in Genesis chapter 1, comprised of a Godhead, of being multiple personalities in the one nature, that it speaks to this personal and this interactive quality. So to say that He is personal, Proverbs teaches that. And to kind of go back on this for just a moment, Solomon's going to establish that in several ways. That on the one hand, this person that's revealed, not just in Proverbs, but throughout the Bible, is a God that is to be feared. Okay, for us to understand God, we got to have a fully rounded view of Him. And so Solomon is going to frequently say this personal God who is a God who is to be feared. On the other side of that, he is going to say that He is also a God who loves. He is a God who you can trust. And out of that, He is a God to whom you should pray. So think about how Proverbs is going to really highlight this, about this personal God, this God who doesn't just get everything kicked off in this world, but who continues to interact with us and can be identified because of His attributes and because of His characteristics. So we mentioned those verses about Proverbs that strengthen our relationship with Him. How does the fear of the Lord strengthen our relationship with God?
It's how we approach the relationship. It's the respect and the understanding of, I guess, the interaction that we're having.
Okay, so out of that fear and that relationship, how are we going to behave? We already know we're going to talk about how God is, and if we're going to have in that relationship, what does that look like?
Like humility.
Okay, so how we humility in what regard? That's great. Humility when or how?
We know His expectation, and so we have to humble ourselves and follow that.
Excellent. So as it regards the things He commands in His Word, right? And so seeing His power. So as I pray that humility is going to express itself. Recognizing the contrast, the difference between Him and me. When I begin to line up the characteristics of God, right? He's perfect. He's all-powerful. He's all-knowing. He's everywhere all at once. He's sovereign. We'll talk more about what that means in just a moment. Everything, He controls providence. You see all of this with who God is, and then you see yourself, and on the one hand, what you see is that you're made in His image of all creation, but you like all of those things. And so it's a relationship of humility, which leads to a relationship of dependency. What I want you to see as you walk through Proverbs is as he makes all these fear of the Lord statements are all the multiplied blessings that come out of that fear. We mentioned one a moment ago in Proverbs 14, 26, and 27, but here's just kind of, it's not exhaustive. Here's a little short list. Proverbs 2, verse 5. By the fear of the Lord, you discover the knowledge of him. I don't have that reverential awe and respect for who he is, then I don't really feel compelled to know more about him. If he is average pedestrian in my mind, if he's like me, take it or leave it. But as I acknowledge and see that contrast, I'm going to discover the knowledge of him. And the great thing is you never get to the bottom of that. Each and every day that you live, you discover as you know him more. And that's what is remarkable to me about the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul in prison. In Philippians chapter 3. A man who is put there because he's preaching Christ. A man who has already by this point been beaten and has been shipwrecked and who has been left for dead at Lystra being stoned because he's preaching Jesus. What does he say? That I may know him. I don't know, do you ever have that frustrating but wonderful desire? You know, as you live every day, and let me tell you, from my vantage point, I'm on a mountaintop or two further down, closer to Canaan's land than you are. But let me tell you, the more I'm doing that climb, the desire to know him has not decreased. I want to know, and I see him at work in the people in my life. It's an incredible thing. The longer we live, the more I know him, the more Bible classes I sit in, the more sermons I may be sitting, prepare and write, and preach or listen to, the more times I go into my Bible each and every day. I'm knowing more about him, but what does it make me want to do? Know more and more, and to say, I really don't understand it all. I mean, he wants me to, and he's given me everything I need, but the depth and the amazing riches, the knowledge of God, Romans 11:33 through 36, it's incredible. Proverbs 10, and I will preach it on no other proverb here. I'll just give you the list. Proverbs 10:27. The fear of the Lord prolongs life. How so? How does it prolong life? I mean, you know people who fear the Lord who died 10, 11, 15, 20 years old. What does Proverbs often do, though? Train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. What's the idea? In Proverbs generally. Generally speaking. So, with regard to Proverbs 10, verse 27, how does the fear of the Lord prolong life? You don't have lengthy, detailed explanations in a lot of these Proverbs. You just have an axiom, a truth that's laid out there, a divine, inspired one.
I could be wrong on this, but to me it's not talking about just this life, but the life to come.
Okay, all right. It certainly opens the door to life in that way. Do you think it's a general principle that the principles of a God-fearing life contribute in positive ways to life extending? Okay. Proverbs 13:13. This is just a statement of truth. The fear of the Lord is rewarded. Proverbs 14:27. The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life. And then a couple of statements at the end of the book. Proverbs 28 and verse 14. How blessed is the man who fears always. And then the virtuous woman in Proverbs 31 and verse 30. A woman who fears the Lord will be praised. So there are blessings that go along with fearing the Lord. But this is because God is a personal and living being. The one that to whom we demonstrate this fear and this awe and this respect is one who interacts through that. We're not fearing some inanimate life force, some impersonal energy. That's our picture of God. He is one who sees. He's one who responds to this fear and this feeling of awe and worship and reverence. But on the other side of that, as we've said, you can love him, you can trust him, and you can pray to him. You know Proverbs 3:5. It's one of the verses not only that we've used a lot in this order, but we use it again today. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. Proverbs 3 and verse 12, in the same chapter, it says, For the Lord reproves him whom he loves, as a father the son, in whom he delights. And I can't speak to the relationship that you have with your parents. The difference, of course, fundamentally is that parents don't do this perfectly. Some parents do this better than others. You're striving to be parents, those of you who are married and have children, you're striving to be parents who are striking the biblical balance, right? That you're showing them tenderness and toughness and fairness and firmness and love along with law, right? And you're one, and we all, and it will continue to be this way as they go through different stages. You're constantly going to be battling and trying to find that center balance. There are going to be times when you're beating yourself up because you're being too hard on your kids. It's natural. It's born of a good intention. And there are going to be times where you think, I'm letting too much go, I've got to do. And this I think that's good for us. As long as we're wrestling, it's when we stop wrestling that we get in trouble and we settle into a pattern one way or the other. But when you think about God and our fear of Him and our understanding of Him balanced by this love, whenever God is demonstrating correction, whenever God is pointing out warnings, we know, we can count on the fact it's because He perfectly loves us. He knows what makes us tick because He made us and He wants the very best for us. And yet, we have these statements alongside of all these Fear of the Lord statements where He's reminding us, just like a father, corrects the son in whom He delights. God loves you. Understand that about Him. In chapter 15 and verse 9, the way of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but He loves him who pursues righteousness. And then in chapter 15 and verse 29, the Lord is far from the wicked, but He hears the prayer of the righteous. And so through all of these means, the writer of Proverbs is pointing out the personal nature of God. And I'm not going to have time to deal with this, but you see the personal nature of God in the creation. If you start in chapter 3, verse 19, and go through verse 26, you see how Solomon is pointing out to his son what God did in the creation. And especially when wisdom says, I was there and I saw all of this, he is demonstrating something that we appreciate. Hey, you already know what you're doing for lunch? Any of you guys going home to eat lunch today? What's in the crock pot? Are you just going to cook it when you get home?
It's chili.
Chili? So it's probably in the crock pot or in the Dutch oven? All right. What y'all doing? Yeah.
Sheep ham, Greek garlic chicken.
Okay, so we're all going to, let's just have a potluck. We'll go to yours. That sounds good, right? So, you think about the love and the attention that you put. We have children. Do you ever make food based on what your children want? And talk about, and I talk about cooking. I'm not the greatest cook. I'm a good eater. But the different spices that I don't use the measuring cups. I just kind of sprinkle that in there, right? That's the best. My wife does that, and my grandma just remember, and my mom. There's a lot of different. You don't get this way without a lot of influences in your life. And you just think about the love and the care and the personal attention. Now, the Creator of all made it so that those things exist. God could have created a vanilla or chocolate world. I'm talking about the kind without even the sugar put in it, right? It could just be bland and without any kind of flavor at all. But God created a world with such texture. Look at the beauty. Look at the colors and all that makes up. All of this points out that the personal nature of the God that we serve. All right, we'll say more about that. Any thoughts, comments before we move to number 2? All right. He is wise. He is infinitely wise. In the passage I just referred to a moment ago in Proverbs 3, verse 19 and 20, we see that God not only wisely created the world, but that it functions by virtue of His wisdom. So wisdom claims to have been present at the creation and assisted. And so in verse 21 through 26, we learn that since we live in a world that was created by wisdom, it makes sense to acknowledge that wisdom and to live by it. And this is the way the Lord will be our confidence. And so Solomon is telling his son, if you want to understand the God who is, you have to have Him intrinsically tied together with His wisdom. So Proverbs teaches that nothing and no one can match God's wisdom. Proverbs 21 and verse 30. No wisdom, no understanding, no counsel can avail, or that is to triumph against God. All right, so here's the question. What does God's infinite wisdom mean for our lives? Because He is an inexhaustible resource of knowledge most practically and effectively applied. What does that mean for us?
We can go to Him for anything.
All right? So, number one, we can fully trust His guidance and His commands. We can go to Him for anything because what we need to guide us in what we're going to do, He has pointed out in His Word. It's always the smartest way to live. Proverbs 3 and verse 6, in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. When we follow His directions, life goes the very best way that it can. We'll be the person that we were meant to be, and we'll help others to do the same. All right, what else? How else does the wisdom of God help us play out in our everyday life?
We can allow Him to have control.
Okay, we can allow Him to have control. Let me lay the list up here. And I know for the sake of time we need to anyway. But let me just go through those. Here's the way I put that, Brittany. We can be free from pride and self-sufficiency. When I recognize God's infinite wisdom, it crushes my arrogance. Proverbs chapter 26 and verse 12. Do you see a man who is wise in his own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for him. The longer I live, the more I realize I don't know. And the less control I know that I have. And that doesn't mean that we check out of life or we just give up, but it causes us to lean more on His understanding and less on our own. How about this? His promises and His warnings are utterly reliable. He never overpromises. He never miscalculates. You know, and I don't blame my parents. I did this as a parent. Do you get excited for like trips and vacations? That's always been an Achilles heel of mine. And especially when it's places like, well, I'll tell you, I'm trying to get Kathy. I have a gospel meeting in April in Idaho, in Twin Falls. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Idaho or not. You know what she says when it comes to Idaho? Isn't that the potato state? You know, it's funny. We said that, and then the first time she ever went to Idaho, we were going to Yellowstone, and we accidentally went around and got lost a little bit. And the very first house in the state of Idaho was this big flatbed truck. Guess what was in the back of that truck? The world's biggest potato. And so we all went and got our picture with that. And so it validated her. I wanted to get her to go to Twin Falls. It's where Snake River Canyon is. It's beautiful there. But I'm probably overselling it too. And that's where Eagle Knievel tried to jump across, you know, when I was little too, I don't remember. But I saw it, you know, it's pretty cool. She is probably not going to be as enthralled as I am. You know, maybe your parents told you, we're going to this place, it's going to be so neat. The thing is, with God, He never overpromises. He never miscalculates. It's always as He says it was. And so, in the book of Proverbs, He says, the righteous flourish and the wicked perish. We can count on that. It's going to happen. And what it does is it gives us hope. It motivates us because we see the love that's behind it. For example, in Proverbs 11 and verse 21, be assured, an evil person will not go unpunished, but the offspring of the righteous will be delivered. And then in Proverbs 12 and verse 28, in the path of righteousness is life, and in its pathway there is no death. And then in Proverbs 13:21, he says, disaster pursues sinners, but the righteous are rewarded with good. So every one of us here today are probably here in a mixture of leaning on God's promises and being concerned about God's warnings. And in fact, it's more than that. It's what impacts our decisions on a daily basis. And so Solomon shows us a God with unlimited wisdom who understands what He's doing. And we couple that with His unlimited power, and He's going to make it happen. And so out of this unlimited wisdom, we believe His promises, and we accept His threats are true. And then in Proverbs, out of this infinite wisdom, we see that evil and suffering are not going to win, but neither are they meaningless. God is never surprised by chaos and disaster. I don't know what you would point to in your lives. I'm old enough to remember with clarity the morning that 9/11 happened. It was a uncommonly beautiful day where I was. I don't know if it was that way all over the country, but it was sunny, it was mild. I was getting ready to go on a mission trip to India and in a gospel meeting, and so I was in a hotel room, and the kids had gone with Kathy out to a park to play, and there was just no way it could have been telegraphed. Could you have known that was going to happen? There are events like that in your life. But God's never caught off guard. He's infinitely wise and possessed with foreknowledge. He's prepared for disasters. I don't know if you remember with Hurricane Katrina, that was one of the criticisms that was made, was that they weren't prepared to respond to that. We serve a God who is the antithesis of all of that. He can't be surprised. Another thing out of his wisdom is that his discipline is perfectly loving and effective. He's not reactive. He's not excessive and not mistaken. One more parental analogy. With 3 boys, and especially the older they got, and the testosterone levels began to rise, it was difficult. That there were times when I didn't respond with a little bit of impulsivity. I repented of that. I never thought it was acceptable, but I lost my cool is what I'm trying to say. And I just kind of, I don't know if you ever had a parent who was just kind of like, it was a stack of firewood until it all came tumbling down, or a Jenga, or whatever you want to say. You know, one word, one attitude, one action, and whether it was mom or dad or both, and then it kind of took it, and it kind of took it, and then finally you pushed it through, and you got all of it at the same time. That's not God. God is perfectly under control. His discipline is measured perfectly. All of this, and my point is, all of this is out of his wisdom. And so Solomon is telling his son, this is what you need to know about God. His wisdom is inexhaustible. Now let me just share this, and I would encourage you to find this out for yourself. That one, he is sovereign, that he's over all. We give you a couple of passages for that. Proverbs 16 and verse 9. And Proverbs 19 and verse 21. Man has plans. God has so often different plans. And I think what I want to do is I want to end on this. I don't know. If you think of the Bible, many people had some specific plans. I think about Paul, the book of Romans. He hadn't been to the church in Rome yet, and he wanted to see them. And he even had a specific itinerary. Sounds like he was going to go through Spain, and on his way up there, he wanted God's will to be done. God's not saying in those kind of passages that you shouldn't plan. Some people point to that, or maybe James 4:13, go to now you who say today or tomorrow, we will go into such a city, we'll continue there a year, buy and sell, and get gain. Whereas you don't know what will be on the morrow. For what is your life? It's a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. But you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we'll live and do this or that. So he's not saying don't prepare for your future. But what he is saying is the plans are always going to be contingent on him. And the thing is that when we let God do the planning and we partner with him in that, it's a far better journey than we had planned for ourselves. The point of Proverbs is a point made in other places. That is that we make our plans the thoughts of God. There's a parable in Luke 12, verse 13 through 21. The parable of the rich guy. Sometimes it's the parable of the rich farmer, but it's the parable of the rich fool. He did well, and he began to make plans, and Jesus' point is that his plans did not include him. Sometimes God is going to reroute the plan of your life. I imagine every one of us here today sit and think about what we thought our life was going to be, and those of you, many of you in the back half of the class, you're in that stage of really making some big plans for the next few years in your life, and God's going to reroute your plan many times. Whatever it is, the goals or objectives you're talking about in your life. But the thing you can always count on, when you look back on all of it, is that what he provides, what he does, where he leads, is better than where you were going to go in the first place. If you trust that about his leading, you'll appreciate Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight paths for your feet. Did you not get that job? Is something not happening in your life the way that you expected or thought that it would be at this point in my life or in this particular pursuit? Don't worry. If you find that God is overriding your will, wherever he takes you will be for your good. We may struggle with God's sovereignty because we don't fully comprehend it. That is, that God is over us and not subject to us. We see inequity in it. We feel like He's not being fair, and we judge by imperfect standards. But just hold on and wait, because God is faithful, and you'll see that. He says more about God. I would encourage you to go back to the book of Proverbs and see all of that. That God is involved. Think about that and look at Proverbs. And God is impartial. That's probably the most exciting thing about God that we can see in the book of Proverbs. Thanks for your attention. We'll finish class up next week.